Hello, I'm Dan Moyane. Welcome to hashtag Connect Africa Moyane, where we seek to enrich people's minds by sharing African experiences and stories that hopefully can contribute to a transforming continent. I'm talking to Milton Nkosi. Milton Nkosi from Soweto. He has this dream as he grows up to know the world. He even uses the old atlases that were printed then to choose a sport. And then he does a quiz with his dad where he can name any of the 50 states of the United States as an example. But his dream about education will take him to places where he's never been. One of them, from what I know, Milton, was the world of journalism. Yes. Now, when you were growing up, I thought you were going to say to me when I asked you that question earlier that you wanted to be a journalist. But that's not what you answered. You answered it differently. So when does this journalism road begin?
So what happened is that while I was still looking for work as a young person, after I finished college, I was now looking for something. I had a few jobs opportunities, but I was looking for something more, something that was speaking to my heart, something that was speaking to my soul.
Your sweet spot.
My sweet spot. And just by sheer chance, someone said to me, there are international journalists who want translators, people who can just translate Zulu to English. If you are available, please just go, you can earn some money there. So I said, oh, no, why not? So I went there, I started interpreting for these guys. In fact, I think they called me on the old phone at home, 949 40 55. That was my phone number at home, landline, telecom. And they called, and then I went and I started traveling with these guys, translating witnesses, explaining what happened when the police came, and I would just translate back to English.
This is in the 90s?
This is now late 80s, 89, okay. Yes. And then, and at that time, South Africa is now cooking. Okay, it's ungovernable. There's so much pressure, international pressure, sanctions. Basically, the apartheid government is now under enormous pressure. And a year later, Nelson Mandela gets released. So that becomes one of my biggest stories while I work with the internationals. And the BBC gave me a contract. So I first freelanced for Viz News, who are now Reuters TV, NBC, and BBC, because they were all in the same, so I would work for any of them. But when I worked with the BBC a lot more, they just gave me a contract. And the advantage that I had was that I was not just translating what the interviewee is saying in their mother tongue, Sotho. Remember, we're multilingual in Soweto, so that kind of makes you look like you are special. But actually, most people in Soweto speak many languages. There's nothing unique about you. But the British thought I was unique. And I used that skill to interpret, to translate. Now, the key thing that turned the tide for me was interpretation rather than translation. So when they were in the editorial meetings and they were planning coverage for the next day or next few days, and they would be sitting there, I'll be sitting there in the corner, I'm a new guy, I only translate, what do I know? And now they're deciding who needs to go where for the coverage. And I'm sitting there listening, and one guy, Fergal Keane from the UK, said to me, Milton, what do you think? The meeting was almost done. I said, well, I think you need to change your camera crews. I think the mass burial is big, but it's not the main story. The one funeral of the one guy is the big one. And everybody said, and they were sending a lot more crews into the mass burial. There were many people who were killed who were going to be buried at the same time. And they thought that was the big story. And I said, no. Politically, that's big, yes. But the story is the one guy who died. All the leaders are going to be there. And that's where the direction of where the struggle goes is going to come from. Because funerals under apartheid became rallies, and they became a source of fueling the anti-apartheid movement.
And some of the most important speeches by leaders will be made there.
Yes, and they will be giving commands to the people. They will be giving direction of what needs to happen next. So the whole editorial meeting sat down and they said, what? We've already planned the thing. What is this guy saying? So they asked me, what do you mean? And then I explained, I decoded it. And then I started interpreting events that if you go and cover a COSATU rally, which is about this, versus this rally, Nkata rally, because sometimes the resources were not always readily available. So they needed to choose where to send their camera. And sometimes it's a hit and miss in journalism. And I would explain in my understanding. And remember, some of the people were talking about our neighbors, and they come and visit at home. So I've got if we're talking stock market trading, I've got the insider trading information. So I know where things might go. Sometimes it's a guess, sometimes it's informed, but I would be very, very influential in the editorial meeting.
So I guess from that time, then in the early 90s, your immersion into the world of journalism became a reality just from interpreting and translating.
Yeah, explaining, decoding.
Yes. So that was a seed of it all where it ended up.
And also it felt right. You know, when you're with the crew and you're talking to ordinary people and you're explaining their plight at night, editing, telling the world, and you see the reaction. You know, we put a piece on BBC television at night. In the morning, the ministers and the prime ministers are issuing statements in response to what we've put out. So you see
the impact of your work.
Impact and the power. You're like,
that
okay.
was now aligned to what was firing you up.
Now you feel the sweet spot is coming alive.
But it has its dangers. When I met you in the 90s, I'm trying to go back to Katlehong, Thokoza, Khumalo Street, when you and I were wearing bulletproof vests and ducking.
I remember you were in a small Toyota Corolla.
For 702.
702, and we were ducking. We were sort of
crouching on the ground.
Bullets
flying above us.
Literally eating dust. You know, it now sounds like a figurative speech, but actually that was literal.
We and I recall introducing myself to you and talking to you, and you were with the BBC crew, and you were wanting to go deep into Thokoza.
Yeah.
And we were being told to go back towards Kwamadala Hostel.
Yes.
At the time, but in the
Khumalo Street.
Khumalo Street, and we were both. Yeah. I looked around. We were the only people around at that spot. We were wearing bulletproof.
Yes.
Because of the dangers of you could be shot by a stray bullet, and bullets were flying all over.
And we were lucky because our institutions were very big on safety. There were other people who were sent out by their news desks with nothing.
In that early period of your foray into journalism, was that kind of coverage one of the highlights for you?
Very much. And the big thing that happened with me then, of course, is that I then go to London to the BBC Academy, and I train as a journalist in the College of Journalism there. And now I'm really in it. You know, script writing, editing, all that stuff. I'm now understanding exactly how the process works. And you realize that if you want to tell people's stories, you must read a lot more. So, you know, there's hard work to this. You don't just stand up and start talking. When you are talking there, it means you've read, you've soaked up information. You're like a sponge. You're taking information live from the rallies, but you're also reading books. You're reading current affairs, newspapers. You're listening to the wireless. One of the things that I really was introduced to in a very big way in the BBC was the power of radio. You know, now I hear podcasts are becoming popular and stuff, but the power of radio and how they did radio in the BBC, they took it very seriously. I think they still do even now. And I I used to record with an Inagra. I don't know, on that day, maybe I had an Inagra, reel to reel.
Yeah, reel to reel.
And when we were
Inagra
editing,
was one of the brands. You had Inagra, you
yes,
had or Eura.
Yes, you were, and we used to cut tape. Literally, when they say I'm editing and they say I'm cutting, it comes from cutting, because we used to cut it with a razor.
Do that.
And I had a China graph, the marker, sitting here in one of the ears, and cutting tape, getting the sound bites right, and listening to the breath. Once you've done a sound bite and someone has spoken, but you don't want the rest of what they were saying, you just cut it to where they end their good point. If you cut it too late, you pick up the breath when they're about to start speaking. So they will talk something like, today the people will survive. It means they were about to talk about something else.
You don't need the E.
You don't need the E.
You must cut it out.
Yeah. So now you
physically,
and it's out and it's clean. Yeah.
Now, Milton, you from being a kid growing up in that highly politicized environment in Soweto, with all kinds of influences around you, links with the families that you mentioned when we started our discussion, ending up being an interpreter, and then you becoming, in the world of journalism, you became the head of the BBC in Africa.
Yes.
I mean, head of the BBC in Africa.
Unbelievable. The first black person to run a continental...
How do you get there? I mean, how does it happen?
So, okay, as I was explaining, when
Listen,
I was...
I don't doubt your ability.
No, I know.
You worked hard
for it. No, I
but
know. And you,
wow.
So I then, then you start getting into the system.
Yes.
So you get a title, you work. So while I was helping and assisting, they told me I'm an assistant producer. I'm like, that's what an assistant producer does. And then now I want to be the producer. So I work even harder, and they say, no, now you know your story. Now you are the producer. And then I became the senior producer. Then I became Africa producer. In other words, I was producing the continent now. And then that put me right there to be the deputy bureau chief. And then after that, the bureau chief left. He went to Washington, Martin Tanner. And then I went for an interview. When you apply, it's like a test. They test you. You don't just get the job
just because.
No, just because. No, you go to London and you sit
there
with the
merit.
board.
Yeah,
yes. Then that's how I got appointed in July of 2000, the end of July.
And for how long were you head of the...
7 years I was head of Africa.
This is before you went to South Asia?
Then after that, I wanted new challenges, so I applied to be the... in fact, first I applied to be head of Asia Pacific out of Singapore, and then that post moved to Beijing. But I didn't get that job. So you learn in life that the glory of life, as Nelson Mandela used to say, lies not in never falling, but in rising each time you fall. So I go for the interview for Asia Pacific. I don't get it. I'm bruised. My ego is bruised because I was becoming, you start to think that you are the cheese on toast. And then you realize you are not good enough. They took somebody else. So you come back and you dust yourself off and you get back at it. Then I applied for South Asia. Then I got South Asia.
And you're based in New Delhi.
So I was based in New Delhi.
Let's come back to Africa.